just the beginning of great things to come. Luke chapter 18 and the 9th verse for those that are prayerfully reading along with us this morning. I'm coming from the New Living Translation this morning. It says, "Then Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their righteousness and scorned everyone else. Two men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, the other was a despised tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer: I thank you, God, that I'm not like a sinner like everyone else. For I don't cheat, I don't sin, I don't commit adultery. I'm certainly not like this tax collector. I fast twice a week rather. I give you 1/10 of all my income." Verse 13. "But the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Reading for emphasis, verse 10 again. "Two men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, the other was a despised tax collector." Come on, turn to your neighbor. Help me preach this if you would. Look him in the eye, grab him by the hand and say, "Are you right with God?" Amen. Turn to one more person, ask him, say, "Are you right with God?" Amen. You may be seated in the house of the Lord. Are you right with God? There's a story about a pastor, and when this pastor was a young boy, there was a couple that lived around the corner from the pastor, and they were always yelling and cursing, and they were always carrying on, and they lived around the corner, but for blocks away you could hear them yelling and just fighting and fussing. And so one day the pastor said he was just walking, and he walked past their house. And the man of that house came out running, and he had it on his pants, but his suspenders were hanging around his pants, and he didn't have a shirt on. And then his wife was chasing him out the house, and she had a bucket full of water, and she threw the bucket, hit him upside the head with the bucket, and some of the water went on the young man before he was a pastor. And so he runs crying home, and he tells his mom what happened, and he said, "Did I do something?" He said, his mom tells him, "No, you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything." And so he asked his mom, "Why do they act like that?" And he said, "That couple's not right with each other." Have you ever been in that position where you just were not right with somebody? Isn't it exhausting not being right? Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone in your family, maybe it's a loved one, maybe it's someone that you go to school with, maybe it's a coworker. You're just not right with them. Can't get along. Doesn't matter if it's Monday or Friday. We just don't get along. And it bothers you. Unless you don't have a conscience, it bothers you. It tears at you. Sometimes we pretend that it doesn't bother us, but it does. You know how when you're in a fight, an argument with someone you care about, and you act like it don't bother you, but it does. And when you're not right with somebody, you don't sleep right, you don't eat right, and you become irritable with people because it's bothering you. And we need to solve it, but nobody wants to take the first step. Nobody wants to say, "I'm sorry." Because we feel if I say I'm sorry, then that's weakness. Well, let me tell you something. Being humble is not being weak. Can I give you a working definition of humility? Humility is strength under control. Let me tell you something. Humility is strength under control. It's easy when someone says something bad to you to say something bad. It's easy if someone punches you to punch them right back. But let me tell you, it takes strength when someone treats you wrong to say, God bless you anyway. When someone is talking about you to say, I love you. Humility is strength under control. So we have to have some humility. We have to be the first one to say, I'm sorry. We have to be the peacemaker. Amen. The Bible clearly says that the humble, the meek shall inherit the earth. And if you ever plan to be one of those that God gives an inheritance to, you got to learn some humility. Now, sometimes we're not right with people, but you know what I also found out? Sometimes we're not right with God. Yeah, we wrestle with feelings. You know, a lot of people, I heard Sister Thurman talking about a loved one that passed. And as people sometimes pass, or they begin to get sick and they think they're going to die, they wrestle with this feeling. Am I right with God? A lot of times when people are living a sinful life, they wrestle with this feeling, am I right with God? People on their deathbed, they don't want to die because they say, I'm wrestling with whether I'm right with God. Then they start remembering things they've said, and they start remembering things they've done, and they start remembering things that they neglected to do, and they start questioning, am I right with God? They're living with the burden of sin on them. They know that they're doing some things that are against God's will. They know they're constantly saying some things that are not pleasing to God. And they wrestle with, are they right with God? David, he had sinned, King David, and the Lord sends Nathan the prophet to him. And when he sends the prophet Nathan to him, the prophet confronts him with his sin. And the thing that I like about David, he does not make excuses. He does not back away from it. He says, you know what? I need to make sure that I get this thing right. I need to make sure that I get my life right with God. And some of us, when God sends somebody your way, you don't try to get it right. You start making excuses. We start denying that we have some things that aren't right with God. But David says, no. I have sinned against the Lord. And he said, I got to get it right with God. When we're not right with God, it can bother us physically. It can bother us mentally. You can walk around depressed and don't even know why you're depressed. But our hearts yearn to be in fellowship and to be right with God. So what makes us right with God, and what damages our relationship with God? That's what we need to know. What damages your relationship with God? Well, one thing that damages our relationship with God is willful sinning. Let me say that again, willful sinning. I'm talking about you got a sin in your life and you know it's a sin, but you just keep on doing it even though you know it's a sin. I got a friend and his father was a pastor, and he knows the Lord, and he told me this: I just like cursing. He said, I just like cursing. Sometimes you got a sin in your life, and it's a willful sin. You know it's not something that you slip and you fall in. You got some sin in your life, and it's a willful sin. You do it on purpose. You didn't even have to say a curse word, but you don't feel good unless you say at least 3 an hour. You willfully sinning, and it can hurt our relationship with God. The next is neglecting fellowship with Him in prayer and worship. Yeah, if you don't come to service, the psalmist says that my foot almost slipped until I came into the house of the Lord. Let me tell you something. When you're outside the house of the Lord, your foot will start to slip. I don't care what you say. You can watch it on TV all day long, but until you come into the house of the Lord, see, things look different when you're on the outside. Your vision is blurry, or a lot more blurry out there. But when you get into the house of the Lord, the Spirit of the Lord talks to you in a different way, and you can see yourself, and it keeps your feet from slipping. So if you stay out of prayer and worship and fellowship in the house, it can hurt your relationship with God. If you don't study the Word, if you don't meditate on the Word, we're supposed to meditate on His Word day and night. We're supposed to study to show ourselves approved, a good workman that needeth not be ashamed, but rightly divided in the Word. And so if we don't study the Word, we can't apply the Word. How in the world can you apply something to your life that you don't know? Some of us, let me tell you something. Any of y'all ever had the problem when you start reading the Word, you start getting sleepy? Any of y'all? I'm trying to read the Word. My eyes, it feel like some midgets are standing on my eyes. I can't stay awake, and I'm about to fall over. And let me tell you something. I'll tell you a secret to reading the Word and staying awake. If you read something that's pertaining to what you're going through right now and study it, you'll stay awake. I'm telling you, it'll be amazing to you. See, you dealing with right now, you dealing with a problem with lust, but you talking about finances. Let me tell you something. Get into the Word on the thing that you're dealing with and start studying that. It'll get so good to you, you won't even want to go to work. Man, the Word says this. Look at this. This is amazing. I mean, you dealing with lying, but you in fornication. You dealing with lust, but you all over there in alcohol, and you dealing with the wrong thing. Get into the place that you have a question or an issue with, and you'll stay awake all night. So get into the Word, meditate on it day and night, study it. Find you a prayer partner, find someone to hold you accountable.
Yes, that's good.
And let me tell you something, when you find someone to hold you accountable, find someone stronger than you are.
Yes, that's right.
The next one is that can damage your relationship if you don't serve Him the way you should. Some of y'all know that you have a mission on your life. You know that God's calling you to do certain things. And we just making up excuses. Oh, God's calling me to the mission field, but I just don't want to go. God is calling me to sing in the choir and put together an album, a Christian album. I know it's going to bless people, but I just can't seem to make time for what He's telling me to do. God is calling me to do a mission trip overseas, but I just don't want to go. God is calling me to translate in the church, but I just don't want to take the time to get it right. If you don't get in your ministry, it'll hurt your relationship with God. Let me tell you something else that'll hurt your relationship with God. When you have issues with your neighbor. You can't be wrong with your neighbor and be right with God. You can't find yourself being hateful with people in your own family and right with God.
That's right.
He said, love the Lord your God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength. And the next one is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. You cannot hate your neighbor. You cannot be wrong with your neighbor and be right with God. It hurts your relationship with God. And so we all come to this point where we say we need to get right with God. Maybe that's you today. You say, I need to get right with God. And in Luke, the 18th chapter, Jesus tells this story to help us understand how we can be right with God. Look at verse 18 again. I want to look at this. And he says, watch this. Let's slow it down and look at this. Verse 9, it says, and Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness and who scorned everyone else. He said, two men went up to the temple to pray, and one was a Pharisee, the other one was a despised tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer: I thank God that I'm not like this sinner a sinner like everyone else, for I don't cheat, I don't sin, I don't commit adultery. I'm certainly not like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all my income. But this tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even to lift his eyes to heaven, and he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest, sorrowing. He was crying. He was beating his chest, calling out to God and said, "Oh God, be merciful on me, for I am a sinner." I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. But those who exalt themselves will be humble, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. This story is about two men, two very different men. One appears to be right with God. The other appears to be far off from God. It looks good when it starts off. There's a good man and there's a bad man. But there's something of a twist in this story. When we get to the end of this story, the good man ends up looking bad. And the bad man ends up looking good. You know, we'll never fully grasp the answer to the question until we understand why Jesus told this story in the first place. In verse 9, he says, "To some who were confident in their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else." Now here's the key to this passage. It's not in the story itself. It's in the audience that he's talking to. Let me say that again. The key to this story right here, the key to this parable, is not in the story itself, but it's in the audience, who he's talking to. He says, to those who had confidence in their own righteousness. What kind of people are they? There's two primary qualifications for someone that has confidence in their own righteousness. The first, they're so religious that they think they're better than everyone else. The second qualification is that because they're so religious and they think they're better than everybody else, they look down on everybody else. It seems as though this was a major problem in Jesus' time. And I would submit that it might be a major problem in our time. That we can get so religious that we start looking down on everyone else. I don't do what they do. And my sins aren't like their sins. That's why you need to please understand this story isn't for everyone else. This story right here is for you and I. The more religious you think you are, the more you need to ponder this parable right here. Jesus tells the story of two men who came to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, the other was a tax collector. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that the Pharisee is supposed to be the good guy. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out the tax collector is supposed to be the bad guy. The first part of the story, when we hear about the Pharisee coming into the temple, we're supposed to start clapping. Hey, that's a good guy right there. He's an upstanding man in the community. When we hear about the tax collector, you're supposed to start booing. Here comes in the bad man of the story. It starts with a good guy and a bad guy. By the time it ends, the good guy becomes the bad guy, and the bad guy becomes the good guy. See, to understand this, we have to make sure that you understand who the Pharisees of this day were. A Pharisee in this day, see, today in the 21st century, you wouldn't want me to call you a Pharisee. Like, oh, don't call me that. But it's an insult, you Pharisee. And no, don't call me that. But during this time, oh, it wasn't an insult. As a matter of fact, it was a great honor. A Pharisee was the spiritual elite. A Pharisee was one, there was only a few of them, and they were very committed to God. Not only were they committed to God, but they were committing to doing God's will. One of the most famous Pharisees there was a man by the name of Paul. He was Saul when he was a Pharisee. And he said this, I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. They were widely respected and admired in the community. Then you have the tax collector. You hear about him. You're supposed to turn up your nose, start booing. These right here were considered the worst of the worst. They were robbers, and they worked for the Roman government. And if the government said, go get $5 from you, they'd go get $15 from you. And they put 10 in their own pocket and give 5 to the Roman government. And they were robbing the people, and they know that they took some money from that little old lady over there, and they took some money from this widow over here, and they're taking more crops from George over there, and they're taking more harvest from Bob over here. And the tax collector was a hated, one of the most villainous people around. It was sinister. It was so well known that when you saw a tax collector coming, the people would try to go the other way because they were the most foul of sinners. They were robbing everybody. So we have a Pharisee. We have a tax collector. To understand this story, you have to understand that what the Pharisee is saying about himself is true. That's what you got to understand first. Everything the Pharisee says about himself is true. He says, I thank God that I'm not like other men. He wasn't. He was one that abstained from everything. He had the highest moral standard of that time. His moral standard was far above everyone else's. When he says, I fast twice a week, he wasn't lying. He fasted twice every week. When he says, I give a tithe of all I possess, he wasn't lying. As a matter of fact, he wasn't tithing off a net. He was tithing off a gross. What is he saying? I'm doing far above what the law is asking me to do. He wasn't lying. He said, I'm not a crook. I'm not a filthy tax collector. I don't commit adultery. I'm honest. I'm faithful. I'm zealous about my religion. And he meant every word of it. This was a good guy by all human standards. To tell the truth, he was a wonderful guy. I mean, they respected him so much in the community because they would fast and they would pray, and then good crops come in. They would say, the Pharisee's been praying for us. And that's why we're doing so good. And people would listen to him when he prayed. And when he prayed, that'd be the one you want to clap for right there. When he prayed, that'd be the one you want to applaud for right there. You say, that's an awesome guy right there. That's a fine gentleman. Everything he says is absolutely true. He's religious, but lost. That's why the short story is shocking. Jesus said, everything he says is true, but he's still not right with God. The second comment I have is about this tax collector. He's generally, for sure enough, a bad guy. It was like trying to find a drug dealer, a pimp. That's a good guy. When you saw him, you knew he was a bad guy. You weren't afraid of really the people in the mafia. The tax collector was the mafia. They would shake you down for more than you owed. And if you refused to pay it, they'd have you put in jail. I only have a little bit. You better have the rest when I come. He's a bad guy. When he prays, he says, Lord, I'm a sinner. The church shouts, amen. He's a bad guy. And he goes to God. And he says just this. This is his whole prayer right here. He said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Now, when you understand this, you got to understand this in the Greek text. In the Greek text, it reads like this. God, be merciful to me, the sinner. What was he saying? He said, I'm not just a sinner, but I'm the worst of the worst. The Bible says that he is standing there. I want to give you this visualization. He's standing there. He's beating his chest. He's sobbing. He's tearful. He is truly repentant for what he's done. And Jesus says something shocking. He said, the good man is not right with God. But that one that's been doing all this wrong. You see that one right there that y'all know all his dirt. You know everything she done did. But she down front crying, saying, Lord, have mercy on me. That's the one I'm going to justify. It's a shocking statement. Jesus, he's making a statement like he made so many other times. They come to Jesus and they call him good master. And Jesus says, why do you call me good? He said, there's none good but the Father. Another time, the word says that there's no good thing in this flesh. It said, even our best deeds, our best works are like filthy rags to God. So we have a problem, but we need to be right with God. We need to be righteous. But our minds, our wills, our hearts, our spirit, our emotions are so affected by sin that we can't do it on our own. So how do we get right with God? That's the question, Pastor Borom. I didn't really need to come to church for you to tell me that I got sin. If you was going to tell me that I had sin, I could have stayed at the house. Because I know I got some sin in my life. What I really need you to tell me this morning, Pastor Borom, is how do I get right with God? I know I got some things I need to work out of my life. I know I got some issues. You don't have to tell me I got issues. We all got issues. Tell me, how do I work the issues out of my life?
Yes, come on.
Well, the first thing you got to do is the first step is to know that you're not right with God without Jesus. Let me say that again. You have to know that you're not right with God without Jesus. And the second step is to go to Jesus and ask him to be your Lord and Savior. There's no way to the Father except through the Son. You cannot get there on your own righteousness. There's only one man that ever came, lived a perfect life, died a righteous man, and that's Jesus Christ. And so the truth of the gospel is this. We couldn't get there through the law. You can't get there from being a good guy. That's what Jesus was saying here. He said, this man was amazing. Fasting twice a week. Praying constantly. Of the highest moral character. But still not right with God. If you ever think you're going to make it because you're a good person. If you ever think you're going to make it because you've given to the church, Jesus sets a standard here. He said, if you ever want to make it, you got to accept me as your Lord and Savior. Jesus makes us right with God. The truth of the gospel is what God demands, he also supplies.
Yes.
You know what? It's so simple to get right with God. You know what I like? When this man comes, has a simple, very simple prayer. Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. The Lord said, he's justified. Another man comes with an eloquent prayer. He said, you done missed the mark. The only thing that's required, the only thing that will do is Jesus Christ. Now let me tell you something. God's standard is still the same. It has not changed. His standard is still Jesus Christ. He still expects us to live according to his will. He still expects you to present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God. That's why we need to ask this question today. Am I right with God? Let me tell you why you need to ask that question. If you never ask yourself that question, am I right with God? You'll never come up with the answer, I need Jesus. Some of us don't like to ask ourselves, am I right with God? Because we know we got issues that we need to fix. So I'm not asking you today, are you right with God? I'm telling you to ask yourself, am I right with God? Not because of anything that you've done, but because your relationship with Jesus Christ, his son. There's a story about a man, and he wants to enter heaven. He's a very well-dressed man. And he gets to the pearly gates, and when he gets there, he rings the doorbell, and St. Peter comes up and, how are you? And he says, I'm doing fine. St. Peter says, can I help you? He says, yeah, I'd like to get into heaven. He said, okay, great. We need more people up here. We love to have the company. He said, you just need to get 1,000 points. And so the man says, well, that shouldn't be any problem. He said, what do I have to do? He said, well, just answer a few questions. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And the man says, well, he says, for 45 years, I was in my community. I was very active in all the charities. He said, in my community, I ran the community chest, and we had good friends in that community. And whenever someone was in need, me and my wife would help them out all we could. And St. Peter, he shook his head and said, that is a great testament. He said, that's 1 point. So the man says, and I was married for 45 years. And I said, I had 5 kids, 3 of them boys and 2 of them girls. And he said, and I spent as much time as I could with them, and I made sure they had a great education, and they're doing very well now. And I did everything I could for them. And matter of fact, before I left, I made sure that they were taken care of, and I did all that I could for my family. He said, that's 45 years. That's admirable. I haven't heard a whole bunch of that. He said, I'm impressed. That's another point. The man starts to sweat profusely. He's almost shaking. He said, you don't understand. He said, I was in my church every Sunday. He said, I gave far above what I needed to give. Every time there was an offering needed, every time there was something needed, I gave it to that cause. And I helped out all around the church all that I could. And St. Peter says, now that's very good. He said, that's another point. So St. Peter opens the book and he said, let me count them up here. There's 1, there's 2, that's 3. Okay, you have 997 to go. The man falls down on his knees. And he said, Lord, have mercy. St. Peter starts to smile. And he said, you just got your other 997 points. If Lord does not have mercy on you, you'll never make it in. There's no way to get in Accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And so I didn't come to ask you the question today. I come to tell you to ask yourself this question. Am I right with God? The doors of the church are open.